Now that we got a quick rundown of the Create React App project, let's continue by installing the Web3 library. Installing the Web3 library is an absolute core pinnacle thing of every Ethereum application that you and I are going to put together. So over at the command line, I'm going to open up a second window. This is still inside of the same project directory of lottery-react. If you are using any other terminal besides iTerm, which is what I use, you can just open up a second terminal window and manually navigate back to the same project directory. Once here, we're going to install the Web3 library just as we did a little bit ago when we were writing our tests. So I will run npm install --save Web3, and remember we want a specific version. So I'll say Web3 at 1.0.0-beta.26. Now, one quick thing that I want to throw out there before we run this command. If you have Yarn, the package manager Yarn, installed on your system, then rather than using npm install, you will want to run the command yarn add, and then the version that you want to install right here. So if you have Yarn installed, use Yarn here. Please do not use npm. The reason for that is that when you first generated your project using Create React App, if you have Yarn installed, it's going to use that package manager to install all of your projects, or excuse me, all of your dependencies. And npm and Yarn don't work together too nicely. So if you use npm to install this module right here, you will eventually end up with an error message in a couple of videos, and it will end up being really confusing. So I just want to throw that out there. All right, so we'll run this, and that will install Web3. Now we're going to wire this thing up inside of our application in just a moment, but before we do, I want you to have a really solid understanding of how Web3 works inside of our project. I'm going to be completely honest with you. A lot of the value that I think you are getting out of this course is just having someone else to point out all the huge gotchas that you will run into as you start building your own Ethereum applications. And what I'm about to tell you right now is probably one of the most confusing things out of everything that we're going to cover, because there's very little documentation about how to address getting Web3 set up inside of a new project. So let's take a look at a diagram. All right, so here's what's going to be happening inside of our application. At this point, we have MetaMask running inside of our Chrome browser, right? Like here's MetaMask up here at the top right-hand side. We are signed in, we have an account, I have xbte test network selected. Whenever MetaMask is running inside of your browser, it automatically injects the Web3 library into any active page, even the page that I'm on right now. So as you can see, I'm at draw.io, which is the service that I use for making these diagrams. If I open up my console and type in simply Web3, let's do that again, Web3, there we go. You'll see that, yep, Web3 is defined. So this Web3 variable right here has been injected onto the page by MetaMask. I can guarantee you that draw.io does not currently use Ethereum or anything like that. So this is not a variable that is coming from draw.io. It is coming from MetaMask. Now this version of Web3 that MetaMask makes use of is version 0.20, which you will recall is the older version that we don't really want to spend any time learning because it's old, it's out of date, and it's a completely different API. And it's much more painful to use because it relies upon callbacks. The good thing about this instance, however, is that this Web3 version that has been injected into our page has a provider already set up inside of it. And you will recall that provider is what allows us to communicate to some given Ethereum network. This provider, in this case, points to the xbte test network. So if we go up here and we verify that xbte test network is selected, that is what this provider is pointing to. So whenever we visit a web page with MetaMask installed, we instantly get access to a copy of Web3 that points to the xbte test network. All right. So that's kind of point one to understand. We automatically get this version of Web3. So how is this going to work with our application? Well, kind of confusingly. So our application is going to be making use of Web3 version 1. Now, when we are using MetaMask on any given web page, MetaMask will always inject Web3 onto the page. So MetaMask is always going to take this library and inject it into the page. And there is nothing that you and I can do to stop that. We cannot stop that. So we need to make sure that whenever we start using Web3 inside of our application, we are using the correct version that we have installed to our project, which is version 1. We don't want to use the old, busted, nasty version 0.2. We want to use the version 1 that we just installed at the command line. But here's where things start to get tricky. Remember, MetaMask has access to all of our account keys and all of our, not only the public keys, but also the private keys. So although we are saying that we don't care about this older version of Web3 that has been injected onto the page at all, we actually kind of do care about it. The provider is what stores those account keys, all the private keys and the public keys. So rather than saying, oh, we want to ignore this thing entirely, what we actually kind of want to do is take our instance of Web3, version 1 down here that you and I are going to create, and we kind of want to tear out the provider that got injected onto the page with this other copy of Web3, if that makes any sense. So we want to create our version of Web3, and we want to hijack the provider that belongs to the injected version of Web3. And I know that probably sounds confusing, but at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. We want to use this other version of, or we want to use this provider because it's going to allow us to just take this provider that's already connected to Rinkeby and use it for all the different transactions that you and I are going to create. So that's the goal. Now this description might seem like it's really weird. It might be confusing. You might be saying, wait, why? What's going on here? Well, fortunately, at the end of the day, all we have to do is really write one line of code to make this happen. We only have to write one line of code to take that provider from the existing instance and throw it into our copy. I just want you to understand why we are writing that one line. It is to make use of the provider from the version of Web3 that has already been injected on the page by MetaMask. Now, the last thing I want to mention here is that for this particular application, you and I are going to assume that the user always has MetaMask installed. So this is a very bold assumption because chances are 99.99999% of people out there who are using Chrome or any browser do not have MetaMask installed or configured. But for just this application, just this very first one that you and I are working on, we're going to take the easy way out and assume that MetaMask is installed. What that means is that this application will not be able to easily be deployed to some remote server and have your friends visit it. In other words, if you want to deploy this application and show it off to your friends, they will have to have MetaMask installed as well. On the next application that we build, we're going to make an application that will work regardless of whether the user has MetaMask installed. So for this first application we're going to make, we're going to take the easy way out, keep things nice and simple. For the next application, we're going to make sure that we have an app that works no matter what device the user is visiting from, whether they have MetaMask installed or not, doesn't matter. We're going to make sure it all works. All right, so that's the plan. Hopefully that doesn't sound too bad. So let's pause right here. We're going to come back in the next video and we're going to write the code that is going to create our local instance of Web3 and hijack the provider from the injected copy of Web3. So quick pause and we'll take care of that in the next video.